she sends out a devotional Monday through Friday through a group. And so I'm not going to read her whole devotional, but I am going to read the Psalms 121:2 and then the prayer, because it just seems to fit with our discussion. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Psalms 121:2. O powerful creator and Lord, you are my sole source of help. My help doesn't come from my own strength, my own reason and thinking, my own abilities, or from others around me. All other help fails in the end. You never fail me. How can I look to anyone but you for strength? You created this universe with the power of your mighty word. Who else can make that happen? You granted me salvation from sin through Jesus Christ. Who else can grant that but you? No one. May these simple truths lead me to look to you and trust in you for help at all times and in all places. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So one of the things that I thought about, is last week was a little rough, because I just want to make a confession. I'm not really comfortable with the fact that anxiety has been around for a long time, and that possibly the anxiety that we have started when we were kids. That's kind of a hard one for me. So I thought I would just go ahead and kind of review what happened for the second half of last week, and then we'll go into this week. Questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Good. So let's, I should be able to share my screen and open anxiety. Here we are. So this was kind of the end of that first section last week, where we talked about what we want to be, and the kind of, if I always love this, because actually we use this for COVID times, but we have these no matter what's going on, right? So we have kind of that fear or closed in section. We have the learning zone, the growth zone, which is kind of where we usually operate, and then the action zone, where our actions really are where we're reaching out and helping the world. So there we go. So then I kind of separated this up just a little bit, and I said, so let's get back to anxiety. And I'm going to, here I got my stuff here. So we talk about, here it is, about ways that anxiety starts. And so why do I feel it? In other words, where did this come from in us? And then when there's COVID virus or other interruptions, are sometimes that increases our anxiety. So when we look at the driving forces, what the material out there, or the reading, the research would say, is the driving force of anxiety is kind of guilt, and even more than guilt would be shame that we feel about things that have happened, right? And when we talk, so I want to make a real distinction here about what guilt is. So guilt actually is kind of a healthy emotion, right? Guilt is when we've have violated our own morals or ethics, kind of our own rules for ourselves. And what guilt can do, though, is lead us to apologize. The result is that we can change our ways, and the apology can actually bring us closer to people that we might have some guilty feelings about. With guilt, the person's values are affirmed, and the possibility of repair exists. Guilt is actually a learning and growing kind of emotion, where those two things, learning and growth, are promoted. And this comes from some reading by Merle Fossum and Marilyn Mason. And so I just kind of want to point that out because I was kind of taking this from one of their articles. When we look at psychological development, though, many counselors will follow kind of the stages of Erik Erikson, who was a psychologist. And he did his research in child development. And he's also developed different counseling modalities. And so, you know, it kind of makes sense that that would be somebody that I would read and follow a little bit because those stages impact at different. So the first stage of development is like from birth to 15 months, kind of, and these stages overlap. And so it's important that we kind of realize that. But in the first stage of development, you develop bonding, of course, with your parent or caretaker, right? That's one of the first things they do, right? They lay you, the baby, on your chest, and so that you can begin to feel the heat of each other and bond with that. So, but it's also a time when trust and mistrust might develop, right? The message actually comes through how we're touched, how we're fed, how we're talked to, and how we're treated. So in those early stages, and when you think of all of the joy that young, kids bring, there's good reason for that, right? It kind of helps us develop that little trust in that person is going to be there for us. Between the stages, the second stage, which is 1 and 3, it's where it determines whether the world, I didn't go from the beginning, did I? Where do I do that? You're seeing my, where do I do that?
Yeah, click on the slideshow tab at the top.
Yeah, the slideshow, and then from this slide. There we go. Okay. So when we look at this, it determines the world is either safe and trustworthy or a place where we need to guard ourselves against. So children that are abused when they're very young, or children that are not talked to, maybe there's fighting in the home. So I'm working with somebody now, and early on, he was taken from his parents, right? And he knows that was kind of around the age of 1. And then he went into a foster home, and he was in a kind of a holding pattern for a short time, but went into the foster home where he was actually adopted. But the adoptive family also ended up with fighting and ended up with a divorce.
Mm.
Yep. And so he has a lot of, he says he trusts people, but he has this anxiety, right? And so he came into my office the other day and I said, so how are you doing? And he said, well, I'm doing pretty good. But I want to know why I have this, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, he's a young person, but I think young people particularly understand this, right? When they've grown up in kind of a chaotic world. And so he and I kind of talked about these stages. And I just looked at him and so I said, so you can imagine some of the confusion, the mixed messages you were getting as a young person. So we're given this message that someone, if it's everything smooth and copacetic and everything is trustworthy, we're given the message that somebody wants a relationship with us. And usually that's through our caregivers. But in his situation, you can see where that may have switched several times. And so even the message about, do you feed at the same time? Now you're in a new house and they eat at a different time. So you get a little mixed messages. And so it conveys also, though, that we're loved for our own right and that we have value and that we are special. So trust develops when we expect and rely on a consistent type of response. So that might not be that we eat every night at 6 o'clock, right? It might be, though, that you're always going to eat, around that time. And so sometimes just depending on how you are in our personalities, even children can be tested. Some of them are what we call easygoing, right? They're more flexible. And other kids are very structured, right? They want to go to bed about the same time or they want to eat about the same time. So even as that young age, we each have our own personalities and our own characteristics that kind of fit in there. And so if we don't have that kind of consistency or the response we like, we may learn that the world isn't to be trusted quite as much as is comfortable. You have questions about that? Yeah, so it's hard when I think back about these young ages to think, my gosh, that people back, even when they're that young, can begin to develop that. But they are human, right? They're not little grown-ups, right? And that's why as parents, we need to determine what they need and how and when to give it, right? So that's hard, particularly when we go to this next stage or 15 months. Yep, please.
Can I say something, assuming you want us to say things?
Yes. No, and
just,
in fact, I want more interaction here. So the next part of the discussion, we're going to actually ask each other questions. So good.
Okay. Well, I just think, I mean, that just to me, I mean, I might be understanding it wrong, but would seem that could help, excuse me, explain why people, I mean, our kids can't talk when they're little, right? So, I mean, and believe me, I wanted to hire the baby whisperer to find out why she was crying all the time, right? I mean, but, we don't know, right? And so does that then makes me think that maybe that's why some kids develop more, because of their personalities and their needs, different needs of like, say there's a structured child who lives in a family has routines, but not like really consistent structure, right? Because that's just not how everybody is. So just based on their personality, maybe they're not really getting their needs met and the parents have no idea, so maybe then they are more likely to develop like a little less trust and a little more anxiety. Am
Yes.
I understanding that? So really, I mean,
you're understanding it exactly right.
And that just shows there's like no way we do the best we can, right? But correct. I mean, it would explain why there's a lot of people who have anxiety, because right. Even from that young age, based on, like, I think my dad yelled at me when I was really young. He didn't know any better. I think I was playing in the toilet, right? And so, I mean, one simple thing like that, I mean, sure, it wasn't great, but I don't know. It just seems like whatever, we have to do the best we can, right? Because we just don't know what's gonna.
Right. And that's all you can do, right? You can only do the best you can.
Right.
And that's why I'm saying is as we begin to learn about these stages of development, just as we learn about them ourselves, we think of kind of small changes we could make. So if we know that a child cries every time at the same time, and they seem to get satisfaction from eating, can we then kind of as adults take that? And so there's that part in here where we're going to talk about sometimes parents get threatened, right? I don't understand why my kid is always crying, right? And that's true, right? We don't. And so we get a little threatened and then we get uncomfortable. So it can kind of play off each other, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we look at 15 months to 3 years, we begin to develop physical independence and we begin to experiment with hanging on and letting go, right? So those children that really kind of just are always hanging on their mother, right? And other times, nope, they want to run off. And so I still think of my nephew. I was babysitting them and we decided to go shopping and my sole job was to hang on to my nephew, right? Because his mother knew him well. The minute you let his hand go, he was out that front door. And I don't even know how he knew where the front door is, but he was gone. And so that was my sole job on the trip. And sure enough, there was one time when I went to touch, I don't know, a piece of clothing or something, and bam, he was gone. And I was running down the street after him. And so, but they also experiment with the word no, right? So you'll know kids, tell them no, but they're going to push their limit, right? They're going to see how far they can go. And so sometimes if we don't respond with kind of a firm but understanding and being consistent in kind of our response, they can also become emotionally available or unavailable, right? So as parents or as adults, if all of a sudden we get so frustrated with them that we don't go running after them, right? They get a real mixed message there.
Mhm.
And so it's just very, very important. So, and some of that though, when we think about that healthy guilt or healthy shame in a child, those are just moments of embarrassment or shyness. You see, they kind of pull that, right, when they feel bad. And so they get the urge that they want to do more by themselves. And so they won't destroy the bonds with the caretaker if they're in that kind of healthy, guilty things, right? So, but if the caretaker all of a sudden says things like, you're no good, you always do bad, then that over and over begins to sink in, right?
Yeah.
So as a caregiver, it's important that you figure out what is the correct stage to let them be a little independent, and then that you encourage that separation. This behavior may be perceived as a threat by parents, though. If kids start going too fast or pulling away, parents sometimes feel like it's a threat. And you've seen people in the grocery store, right? When their kids start to throw a tantrum, there's all these different reactions, right? And if you can see a parent who is being firm, but at the same time is not being punishing.
Yeah.
And so, right. And so those are kind of the situations that we're talking about. So their responses for kids, if it's not consistent, the children become confused about their caregiver's boundaries. And that's kind of a really dangerous zone, right? And it doesn't mean, so once you push the limits and mom is frustrated enough to kind of give you a swat on the butt or something, I guess I'm not a proponent of hitting anymore. But when I grew up, I think I got a couple good swats. And so, but when you think about that, you know, then the kids don't know, it's a real mixed message, and they don't know what their boundary is. And so if we have, if love is withdrawn, children begin to believe that their feelings are wrong, and they need the for autonomy is misguided, right? So as they're pushing out, then it might be misguided because the parent withdraws some love when they've done something they're not happy with. And we all have situations where like that happens, right? So I had a friend who was a nun, and she said, if I can get a child before they're 3, I can correct this kind of behavior. But if it's after 3, when they've already gotten the message that they're a bad child, it's going to be much harder, right? Not impossible, but much harder. And so I kind of wanted to explain this because sometimes we did. Well, as I was doing this last week, it wasn't separated up quite the same, and it wasn't clear. And I was feeling like, this is too young, right? But it's not. I mean, it's one of those stages. So if we look at the next stage of 3 to 6 years, that's when they begin to internalize that right and wrong. First, they learn what right and wrong is. They learn how their own behavior might hurt both themselves and others. So that kind of gives them some power. So guilt, again, is that feeling that they have when they've done something wrong and have gone against their own developing moral values. So the values of the home. But remember, with guilt, we can teach them at this time that it helps us realize we've hurt somebody. It leads us to apologize. So, you know, I think parents who kind of talk their kids into apologizing is a good thing. It affirms your values and it helps you connect with others. So if they learn that, then they can move ahead with that, right? And so, yes, that's one of the things. Was that Bethany? Was that you that kind of asked that question? Anyway, anytime that, you know, we're only people too, and all we can do is be who we are and try hard to do what's best for our children as we see them and absorb them and observe them. We're not perfect, and so we have to kind of give some of this back too, right? Because kids have the ability to pick up what's right and wrong. And that's what's interesting, I think. Questions? Okay, so when we look again at guilt versus shame, guilt is making a mistake, and shame is about feeling that we are the mistake. Guilt is a feeling, and shame is an identity. So an example of this might be, you're always naughty. So anytime we kind of use those words that are all encompassing, you know, if you would just say that was bad behavior,
Yeah.
that child then has the choice to kind of say, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. As opposed to you're always naughty is, I'm a naughty person, right?
Yeah.
Or you're a thief. If you try saying something like, you know, that was not yours and you took it, right? So it still keeps them accountable, but it doesn't put all of the shame and blame on them. It's something we do. So at Lutheran Social Services, when I worked there, they used to have a saying in the one of the children's programs, you know, there are no bad kids, but there's bad choices, right? And so as we begin to think about this, we can work with this. So, so then I kind of say, well, what else is missing, right? Because there are lots of reasons that we get anxiety. So what I did is just kind of list some thoughts of kind of where we are. Sadness or a combination of fear and disgust will cause anxiety, right? And those come maybe at a later stage. A sense of belonging, if we don't have a clear sense of belonging, we feel like we don't fit in, and that can bring kind of that feeling of high anxiety. Sometimes we don't feel we're equal to others, right? Somebody has something that we want and we feel like we're not quite good enough to get it. That will give us anxiety. Feelings of insignificance is kind of a core cause to anxiety. So we sometimes feel like we're not quite good enough, or maybe we're just not important, right? We can be left out of every discussion. And the truth of the matter is you do have a lot to say. You have voices, and there's reasons you're given that voice. And sometimes we're just not quite comfortable with the world, right? So if your friends are acting different from you, it may not be bad, but we're just not comfortable with it. And then we begin to worry about that. So trying to fit in, trying to measure up, trying to find a place for oneself, and then sometimes just being alive. And everything that we see going on in the world around us is a kind of a constant state of stress, right? If we live in kind of a chaotic environment, there are a lot of people that they prefer to live that way, right? So if we think about that difference between the relaxed and the structured child, there's a lot of people that just live in a chaotic environment. So the interesting thing with this client I have is his parents, before they divorced, had actually adopted 6 kids, right? All with different backgrounds, all different ages. And so you can see how much, and they probably liked that, right? They liked having all of that confusion, all of that activity in their household. It seems like a lot to me, but there are those stories out there. So when
Gail,
yeah,
could I share something? This is Tiffany.
you can always say something, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, one is I would wonder if those parents, the fact that they got divorced
Mm,
and knowing how children with special needs or different backgrounds, that's another story, but that definitely could have, because we all
lot.
deal with all that, what it takes to parent that, we're going to deal with that differently. So anyway, but that would be another interesting study. What I wanted
Yes.
to say about what you were just talking about, and just offer passive a story that was shared at seminary and boundaries training, to just help people kind of see how, learn a little bit more, maybe recognize how we work within ourselves and why, was that
Yes.
the person leading said, I believe she said, think about it like your earliest memory of not being in control, of like having something happen that you had no control over. And some people thought of things in their teenage, like a decision they really, some people thought of things, 10, some people thought of things when they were 4. And she said that when stress comes up or hard things, the reason to recognize that is you kind of, that's where you might be going back to when you're in that position, that of feeling, even as an adult, that you're powerless, that you so I think that can relate to stress, can relate to anxiety of not as not feeling empowered. And if we have experiences when, I mean, we're all going to need to learn what that's like, but if we have experiences when we're really young, especially, or if your first time feeling it is when you're a teenager, you're going to react to it a certain way. Or if your first time feeling it is when you're 4, that might be a really, hard place to be in. So just to share that example of the idea of power or powerlessness, or what is your agency, that can be a way to help understand your response to things, which may be, your anxiety or stress around things.
Yep, definitely. Yes, thank you. So,
yeah,
and that's why sometimes when we think back about, well, anxiety, we think back about events that happened, and we might think they're not connected, but maybe they are, right? And so it's just kind of interesting. I remember when I was a knit outfit. And so it was a little different style than I normally wore. But I remember when we were kind of in the living room, I decided that I needed to do a back bend, right? Oh. So here I am, right? A little 4-year-old or 6-year-old doing a back bend and thinking I'm pretty smart. And when I looked up, he gave me this kind of disapproving look, right? Now, it's interesting that I still worry today about what I look like with clothes, right? And it may not be attached to it, or it may be part of it. But there was that feeling that I immediately felt, why is he looking at me like that? It wasn't an approving look. And of course I was doing it to be approved, right? So you have those kind of things, and that's just one tiny little incident in my life. So I can think about that and try and put that in perspective, right? That he certainly wasn't understanding towards kids, and he didn't have any kids. So, you know, and I can maybe dismiss it, or I can take that in and then worry about what I'm wearing each day, or stop doing back bends in front of kids, right? Or other people. So it is kind of an interesting thing. So toxic shame, though, is something that destroys our self-esteem and fuels the negative emotions in depression and anxiety. You can recognize toxic shame in common messages people tell themselves. So this is where it switched over from that kind of thing from where we're talking about where we're learning to grow to something that we're internalizing. So I'm so stupid, I can't do anything right, right? And a lot of people that I work with will say they were told over and over by their parents how stupid they were, right? And yeah, you know, and it's like, where did that, parents don't realize it, but because they're frustrated, but where does that get them? No, I'm always saying the wrong thing. So what's wrong with me? I'm so fat, I look horrible. I can't go to that party because I look this way, right? I'm such a mess, I hate myself. And so that kind of internal talking, when we talked about those negative core beliefs, this kind of all should eventually fit together, but that's why we went through all of those kind of negative core beliefs. So when people engage in this kind of negative self-talk, it might be just from time to time, but people with depression and anxiety tend to do it a lot more, and with frequently debilitating effects. And I think that's what's important. Hopefully that's your phone call, Kathy. So anyway, oh, okay. And I'm glad personally, but anyway. So this is kind of why we went through those messages. It's important that we realize that some of that still affects us if we're carrying a lot of anxiety. We're hardwired for negative anyway, right? But when we have anxiety and we tell ourselves those messages over and over, it's just like somebody else telling us. And so it is important that we recognize it. Questions? Okay, so let's just look again a little bit about healthy, what I call shame guilt, right? Because guilt leads to shame so quickly we don't realize it. But with healthy guilt, we realize our own limits. We are actually being human. Excuse me. We're accepting our limitations. We're beginning spirituality, and we realize that there's something big out there. We're accepting ourselves, right? I should be able to handle this on my own. And at least we realize that there's some reason why we can't. And sometimes when we turn towards more of the shame, it leads to frustration and causes more effort than what we need. Oops. And it's unhealthy. It leads us to be more human or feel less than human, right? So when we're in shame, we think that we're not as good as we should be. We're less than human. Questions? So I kind of went back and forth and I thought, well, let's just talk about other causes of anxiety. So apprehension of what might or might not lie ahead, uncertainty of future circumstances, triggering events in the real world. So maybe an upcoming doctor's visit. Maybe there's a conflict in your relationship or rent increase, not being able to afford something. There's anxiety. Bouts of anxiety are entirely normal and one of the unavoidable costs of being alive. So anxiety alerts us to danger, compels our attention, and urges us to make necessary preparations. So that's kind of those, but that doesn't mean we don't have anxiety about all of those. It's how, what kind of boundary do we put on that is the question. So as worries intensify, they kind of run through our brain and they engage other problem-solving mechanisms on one side, or maybe it's overwhelming us and impairing our ability to function. So with that anxiety, if we can always grab a hold of it and kind of say, this is just some stress, and these are the steps I need to take, we're going to be better off. So worry is the cognitive component of anxiety, and it's usually over uncertain outcomes, right? None of us know what's gonna happen. Okay, so, and then there's more, which as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, we didn't even mention that some anxiety is actually kind of physically based, right? So medications can be off, or new medication causes anxiety. Sometimes just physical difficulties, definitely trauma, times of isolation, and because of times of isolation, I put pandemic. Too much TV, right? Or online time, right? So if you watch the news more than once a day, it's a little too often. And maybe too much of anything or not enough of anything, right? So it's kind of interesting. That's why each person has to figure out where they are in that, right? Sometimes it's evolving. So sometimes you might watch the news twice in one day and think, oh, this isn't so bad. And other times you just want to pull your hair out. Anybody experience that?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about recovery, that's the goal here is, one, we learn about how much anxiety is out there, and then we learn what we can do to help ourselves, right? So recovery means learning to feel more spiritually connected to ourselves and to others around us. We realize that there's power out there that's greater than ourselves. We don't walk alone. We accept our own limitations, right? So sometimes people have anxiety, don't sleep well, right? So we have to kind of think about how can I sneak a nap in, right? And then we talk about just kind of like if we follow the 12-step program, or I call it the AA, the first step is we're powerless over this anxiety. Sometimes our lives become unmanageable, and so we need to turn to our higher power to be with us. And certainly I find that if I get too anxious, if I can turn that around into something I'm grateful for, a lot of it will kind of, it might not dissipate, but it sure feels a lot better because I know that there's that other side of the picture. And so trust in our guide or our higher power is leading us, and he does walk with us. And when we remember those things, those are going to help lead us to recovery. And there are so many different modalities out there that help with recovery. I thought maybe at the last session, we could talk about what's worked for us. I know certainly, Jenny, you've used yoga, and I don't know if you did that for anxiety or just because you like to be flexible, but there's lots of meditation, yoga, exercise, walking, listening to music. It doesn't have to be so hard. There are actually things but we do have to take the time to do the stuff we enjoy. And that's one of the things that's really hard. If we don't build that into our schedule, we're not going to do it, right? When we don't do it, then we begin to feel a little more anxiety. And so So we really, I think God put us on earth to enjoy some of the stuff here too. So.
Tai Chi is another calming activity.
Mhm. Yeah, when I did a little Tai Chi, I think I felt the best I ever did. So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, yeah. So there's just lots of them, and lots of them we don't think about. So then I ended last week with kind of our next steps to make sure that everybody's on the same page as to where we're going. So with section 6, we're going to begin to talk about missions, goals, sense of direction, manageable steps, and then talk about credit for the achievements. Sometimes we just don't get credit for the things that we do, or we don't give ourselves credit. And when we stop and think about some of the things we did, boy, I'm always amazed with some of the things I hear from people, right? We, in a way, we do know how to take care of ourselves. We just have to do it. And it's
Gail?
hard. Yep.
Sorry, this is Tiffany again.
Yeah.
Would this be a time, I was just thinking here as you've given us this really helpful wide list of all the different sources of anxiety possible, as you know. And before we move too far past that, I just want to share from a book I've read and just looking at society that I don't know, it's helpful to me to just to notice also the stress and anxiety of being a woman and being a girl, of expectations of what that might mean, that you're the caretaker, that you keep everything together, that is in us from, and just different stresses of maybe you don't want to fit that, or, you know, it just kind of, so just some of that, the way our system is, if you want to call it patriarchy, and or just look at it in another way, but that's, I think as women, I like to just share, to recognize that and to think you might be putting a lot of stress on yourself that isn't attainable, or is, you know, is handed down. And then also as women, yes, my love. Okay, you can have some more. Also as women, I heard someone call it the bikini industrial complex.
Yes.
So that there is that whole thing that we're living under, and the standards of beauty and who is setting that, and the idea of beauty, and just to step back and see that puts a lot of stress, whether we recognize it or not, and on us, on our children, on our, you know, our grandchildren. So just wanted to share that to as some of those things that I know I didn't even realize that. I just was absorbing it and not recognizing that maybe it was coming from outside, and I didn't need to absorb it in that same way. So just wanted to share that.
I appreciate that a lot. I think, you know, there's a lot of things, well, I didn't put it on here, but anything that we discriminate against, you know, I think can also add a lot of stress if you have one of those discriminating characteristics, right? So, so yes, I agree with you fully. And in jobs, we know the difference. I mean, women are still paid less than men, right? In similar jobs. It doesn't make any sense, but it is there. And that does put added pressure on us. Yes.
Can I add something too?
Please.
Yeah, so I thank you for sharing that, Tiffany, and that totally, I certainly have obviously felt all those things, but one thing I've struggled with a lot in my life is, in addition to those things, feeling like I have to also live up to all the typical male expectations of getting a good degree, and then either getting a really great, and I went to a good college, and so it's like I've always felt like, you know, my classmates there, I mean, I did well in school, but I never had like this. Anyway, I've felt the pressure to be successful in both the home realm and the you know, the world realm and the business realm, or whatever. And I just never, it's just my whole life I've felt, you know, that pressure to be really successful and to be really smart and have these great, you know, jobs that do world changing things. And I've never been able to, I've never felt comfortable with that. So anyway, it's just another.
Well, it's very true, you know, and they had a special on TV the other day, and it was actually about a scientist who went to, and where did she go? What?
Oh, I saw that.
Antarctica? Yeah,
Yep.
right. And just the subtle pressure that was put on her because she was a woman.
Yeah.
And it was, when I watch those, it makes me so mad that
Yeah.
it's sometimes better that if, you know, if I get the gist, once I've gotten the gist, I kind of say, well, you can turn the mute on, or let's change the channel, because I just feel myself more and more worked up, right? And so, so yeah, that competition and that having to live up to something that you're not, and you know, it really stops us though. It's almost like because we get shoved down in the rut, we can't quite get out of it and get to where we want to go. Thank you for sharing that. So, and because we don't always have control over our situation or other people, it is helpful for us to do the things we can. So let's just go, let's see, so click to exit. Okay, so if I can go to my next session. You are screen sharing.
Looks like we've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay, well, yeah, that's kind of putting stress on me. But we'll take a look at it and see if I can, excuse me. Here we go.
Sorry about that. I guess I was just wondering if we wanted to start this or save it for next time.
Yeah, you know, and I think what I would like to do is just kind of go to part of it, if I can go through part of it quickly.
That's great.
So with section 6, we're actually talking about our mission in life, right? Because if we have a good mission in life, we're keeping our eye on the prize, we're getting focused during times of high anxiety, we can set the pace, we can be realistic with our current life, and we can get to know ourselves. So what is a mission statement? And so somebody might have something to say about this, and I would welcome any input. But it's a formal statement of aims and values of ourselves. It's a personal mission statement that defines your values, who you are, and how you define success. A personal mission statement can be a guide to help you with your decisions, help you stay focused to meet your long-term goals. Anytime we're looking at meeting a goal, then we're more focused and we're not letting anxiety take us off the path. And a personal mission statement creates boundaries that make decision easier. So as if I look at kind of when I say decision making and goals, that means if you have a value or a statement that you want to be more spiritual, what are you going to do to be more spiritual, right? So it's not hard. It's like, I want to be more spiritual because I want to know my God walks with me, is what I want to have happen, or I want to walk with God. That means I need to read the Bible more, right? And that would be real simple. Or sometimes if you say family is your value or where you want to end up, right? So what are you going to do? What do you want to have happen? You want to spend more time with your family. That may mean as much as you not accepting overtime, right? It means giving up the TV and making your family do things with you. And so it's kind of that, when we think about that, it's like, this is what I want. This is how I want to see it. So if I'm valuing family, I want to spend more time with my family. What am I going to do to make sure that happens? And so when we look at mission statements, we're looking at how do we measure our anxiety now? And so I just use a scale of 1 to 10, right? 1 is very, very almost no anxiety, and 10 is where I'm going to jump out of my skin, right? And so where am I on that? And I kind of check it in the morning, at lunch, and in the evening. You can choose any 3 times during the day that you want, but then you should kind of get a number, right? So like today I might have been a 5, right? And so that number will help that you have is assuming that you believe that anxiety helps, right? So if I'm always at a 1, then I'm probably not taking any risks in my life. And that's not good. For me, it's not good. So I always kind of want to be maybe up between a 3 and a 4, right? And then when we look at a mission, it's to direct us during high anxiety times, right? And it helps us make value judgments. So these are some of the things when I think about judgments. How will I spend my time, my energy? What kind of environment do I want to be in? Remember, I said some people like chaos. How will I spend my money? And how will I protect my values? And so the last but not least is what type of relationships support my decision? So when we take care of ourselves, we reach out to others. So these were questions I was going to go through, have each of you answer. So we can do that next time, but I want you to be prepared. So who do you contact? What are your warning signs? What do we do to keep ourselves in balance? This is kind of an important one. And then, is this part of your mission statement to have those people lined up for you? And then what do we want our friends to say about us? Also talk about a mission statement. So what I was going to do is say choose 1 or 2 for next time. Write your values. Write what your values mean to you. Sometimes people will use a life story, or maybe they even write their obit, because that's what people will say about you. They'll write a mission statement, and who will you include in this information? So that was kind of the assignment. And then the upcoming would be the next session. So goal setting. Developing curiosity is really good when you're dealing with anxiety, which is also kind of going with the flow. We should eliminate shoulds and should not. How do you like that? We should eliminate. It's eliminating shoulds and shoulds not. Enjoy and appreciate your feelings, and then kind of decide for that last session, what do we kind of want to do as our next step? Do we want to practice, or do we want to share? I had kind of maybe mentioned this before, but I was hoping that we would have more sharing in this group. And so I really appreciate the comments were shared tonight. There's not one person who is an expert in stress. There, you know, like I said, it always amazes me no matter what I pick up. It seems like there's an article in stress in there. So the whole world is dealing with some. Comments? Are we past our time?
No, we have about 2 minutes left. Do you want to go back to the assignment? Do we want to do that? Or
Yeah, what do
thinking?
people think about this?
Oh, that's a great idea. Mission statement.
Is that something that maybe we could write and share with each other so we got to know? Because sometimes in our mission statement, when we think about anxiety, and we think about, you know, what is it that propels you to reach your goals? For me, I have to have a deadline. So that kind of raises the anxiety during that time, or at least the stress. Has anybody done these, written this down? Okay, so it's kind of like, you know, I don't want to say it's a business plan, but it's certainly for us to look at how we want to spend our time and our money and our resources, meaning, you know, our time and certainly ourselves. How do we want to share ourselves? I think it's part of why I'm doing this is because sometimes I do, I'm on committees or whatever, but I don't always share a lot about me, right? And so, yeah. So I don't care which one of these you do. I just think it's important that we do one. And when we talk about values, and that's one of the lessons I have at work is to teach about values. And we'll find that people will say, well, I value my family, right? Well, you just spent the last 6 months using drugs. So tell me about that, right? And so we have to get down to what they're actually going to do to change that. So if you value it, you have to do something with it, right? And so that's kind of a different way. I try not to let them get away with saying that, you know, they value their friends. It's like, well, what is it that you do with your friends that you enjoy, right? And so it's kind of interesting. Some of them will get down to, well, they actually support me, right? But it takes a while. And so, but yeah, I would like that if we would do one of these. Okay. So you can choose, and then when we get together to talk about it, well, you can just tell us about it, whichever one you chose.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
what
So-
about people that weren't here? How will they know what
Well,
to do?
Yeah,
Send this out in an email tonight.
that would be great.
Has it?
Yeah. So I have,
Would you be able to send this to me, like the text?
Yeah. I can send you, can you pull out the page for the PowerPoint? I can just send you the PowerPoint.
Yep, that sounds good.
All right. Well, why don't we close? I have a little poem. This is my friend Pagan, the blonde. Can you see her? There, anyway. She and another friend wrote a poetry book. They wrote 30 poems in 30 days.
Oh,
And hers was Dancing with the Muse. 2 a.m. and I'm up again, stumbling in the dark, trying to find a pen. Finally, I turn on the light and try to capture words whispered in the night. So maybe we can think about words whispered in the night while we're writing our mission statement. Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Gail.
thank you.
You're welcome. That pull it together for you, Bethany?
Yep.
Good, thank you.
Mhm.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.